Okay, so dear colleagues, welcome back. I hope you have had interesting discussions in the panels and all already find some kind of overlappings, maybe between the projects that could be a ground for cooperation. Now, the organizers asked me to remind you of a hashtag. It's called DG-CHANSE that you could use if you post pictures or other things about the conference. Ahead is a very interesting panel session on AI and its potential social empowerment or disempowerment. I will just introduce the moderator of the session, and then I'm very happy to give her the floor. So the moderator is Marta Peirano, who is a researcher and a journalist, a tech columnist at the Spanish newspaper El País, and a geopolitics commentator at Radio Nacional de España. So Marta, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Well, thank you and welcome all of you to this panel on AI and its potential social empowerment or disempowerment. My name is Marta. I'm Spanish, like you just heard, so be warned that I'm going to butcher every name in this room. Industry leaders are claiming risk of extinction by AI should be our global priority on par with pandemics and nuclear war. And then it seems that researchers are hung on the bias part, algorithmic bias, surveillance, disinformation, intellectual property theft, and most important, the potential to exacerbate existing inequalities in the world. So governments seem to be torn between the need to modernize the country, which is the expression that the president of my country used the other day with Sam Altman, the CEO of OpenAI. He said, we need to modernize the country with AI, and then protect sovereignty and guarantee citizen rights. So lucky for us, to talk about these tensions, we have here four amazing specialists, researchers, and thinkers in the field of OpenAI. I will begin by introducing them one by one and asking them a question so they can hopefully reveal their intentions on this panel. So, Aleksandra Przegalińska. There you go. He's a philosopher and researcher of new technologies with a special interest in green and sustainable technology, humanoid artificial intelligence, social robots, and wearable tech. She's a public speaker, a podcaster, and associate professor of management and artificial intelligence at Kozminski University in Poland, and also the vice president, I think. And she's also a senior research associate at Harvard University and a digital EU ambassador for the European Commission. So, Aleksandra, as we said, Sam Altman, CEO of OpenAI, just visited Poland. Indeed. So, knowing
I wasn't there.
You wasn't there. He did not call you.
I unfortunately had to decline the invitation, but there was a very big meeting organized in Warsaw. Many people showed up. I do have to say that together with my students of artificial intelligence, we watched part of the streaming. So I was somewhat digitally present.
Excellent. So knowing what his speech has been so far and the intentions that he brought to Europe, which was pretty much a fear-mongering tour, but also he seems to be looking for headquarters, like an office space. So what's the big deal with generative AI?
Well, that's a big question. I guess we are all witnessing what is happening since particularly, I guess, November last year. Obviously, for those of you who have been in the field or following the field, we've seen transformers, so models that can generate text and also video or images. We've seen them before, right? So since 2017, there were those first attempts to create systems that could complete a sentence that a human has started. And they were quite successful at it. Interestingly enough, Google was the first company to introduce a model like that. Bert was the name, I think, as an honor to the Sesame Street character. But we only hear about ChatGPT these days, right? So that's why I'm saying that I guess November last year is a milestone, because this generative AI reached a certain point where it became in a way very accessible. I don't want to say democratized, because I think it's a loaded term, but I would say accessible in the sense that you could easily access it. Technically, just you had a website, and also the accessibility was in another dimension, and that's the fact that instead of coding, you could prompt it. So in other words, you could just speak to the model in a language of your choosing, which makes it much more easy to interact with a complex a machine learning system. So I find that moment to be very interesting, and we've been living in a pretty, I would say, turbulent landscape since then, because it did not stop there, right? What we have seen, I think, for the past couple of months, what we have all witnessed was an acceleration, further acceleration, new engines, new versions of the engine, plugins, apps, and also, I would say, a lot of competition, right? So GPT or ChatGPT is probably this emblem, right? So it's the main engine that people are using. It's a bit like Googling, but today. But obviously, other competitors are also stepping into that field. So it all revolves around generative AI. And I would just leave it here and perhaps just add one more thing regarding this Turing process. I find it very, very interesting what is happening. And I'm also following closely this whole situation, because together with this mainstreaming of artificial intelligence, finally we have a discussion on regulations. We should have had this discussion earlier, and there were many people calling for it, but well, the time is apparently now, and many of you probably have seen how Sam Altman in particular came to the White House. The senators have asked how they could regulate artificial intelligence so that he could provide perhaps some guidance or answers. And then he came to Europe, and for me, I guess an interesting part of the debate was that the general idea is to come and say, we need a regulation. Look, we have built a very powerful technology. It can multiply whatever is, so also negative things, and therefore we need a regulation. The extinction we can leave for later, that discourse, the Terminator discourse. But I would just say, okay, so I guess the intention was to come to call for regulations, and then the regulators have said, how about we classify your technology as high-risk technology? And then Sam Altman said, well, if that's the case, then I would withdraw ChatGPT from Europe. But obviously, well, that discussion went on and it still goes on, but I think we are in a very interesting moment where the implementation is very rapid, very fast. Some businesses, particularly those regulated ones, are already a bit overwhelmed with the speed of it, I think. Not sure about the users, maybe the sentiment there is different. And on the other hand, we have a discussion about the regulation that has been drafted for the past 2 years and now just simply has to completely change. So, yeah.
Super. I mean, I agree with you that the reason why the whole industry has exploded is precisely because it has managed to hack that human interface, which is our natural language. No? All right, so Radboud, Winkels, I'm doing well, is a psychologist and an AI researcher specialized in artificial legal reasoning, social network analysis, natural language processing, legal data science, and legal ontologies. He is the associate professor in computer science and law at the Leibniz Center for Law, where he teaches in AI and forensic science. He was the president of Zurich's Foundation of Legal Knowledge and Information Systems of the International Association of AI and Law. So I think you're the right person to talk about the natural language as an interface. Why is that so revolutionary for a machine? Like, what does it do, and what does it pretend to do that it does not do?
It's leading the witness, I think.
You felt?
Well, like you just said, I think because it makes access for people in general much easier. I mean, basically we communicate with natural language, and of course a lot of body language, etc., which we are missing out with the machine most of the time. But it is the most useful interface for humans. So in that sense, as soon as a machine seems to grasp the skill of conversing in normal language, we as humans tend to attribute human-like characters and features to it, and then it becomes more human, more scary in some instances, but at least much more approachable. So it is a really a leap in how do you say this, in embracing these kind of new technologies. That's at the same time a risk, because naively we know from all kinds of studies that once machines perform according to expectations, then in a little while most humans will no longer question it or critically assess it. The same they do with humans, politicians or whatever, or companies, etc. So, but I think that's the major advantage of these kind of interfaces. Yeah.
Well, we will later talk about whether or not that's a magic trick. But our next guest is Mhairi. Oh no, I've been training all morning for this. It's Mhairi Aitken. She is a sociologist and an ethics fellow in the public policy program at the Alan Turing Institute, an honorary senior fellow at the Australian Centre for Health Engagement, Evidence and Values at the University of Wollongong in Australia, and one of the 100 brilliant women in AA ethics. So I'm going to ask you, what impact has people like Sam Altman and his end of the world speech in your ability to talk regulation with administrations?
Yeah, I mean, this is one of my biggest concerns at the moment. These kinds of narratives of like existential risk, the narrative that AI could somehow develop its own form of intelligence, superhuman intelligence, and ultimately become a threat to humanity. Like, that's a really familiar narrative. You know, it's a plot line of like so many Hollywood blockbusters, so many works of fiction. It's really, really familiar. It's really compelling. It's not true, but it's a narrative that comes around often. But until recently, it's always kind of been on the fringes of, fringes of credibility in terms of discussions around AI in policy circles and regulatory circles. But we've seen in recent months, for example, following Hinton's resignation and statements from the likes of Altman, that these statements, this narrative is increasingly coming from big tech players, is increasingly coming from people who are seen to be kind of leading the way in innovating with these technologies. And that's giving it more credibility. And we're increasingly seeing regulators, policymakers, people who are leading the way in developing regulatory and policy responses around AI, increasingly giving this narrative serious consideration. That really worries me, because we need, this is a critical time where we have the EU AI Act making its way through. There's discussions around regulation of AI across all jurisdictions, and it's really, really important that regulation focuses on the real present risks of AI, the real risks that AI is already posing today, and doesn't get distracted by these hypothetical, far-fetched scenarios. And actually, I think that is why this narrative is being pushed, because it's a convenient distraction. It's every time that they say things about existential risk, or the risks that AI poses to humanity, it's moving the discussion away from, well, how do we hold companies like OpenAI accountable, to, oh, what will we do if at some point in the future this AI itself becomes a dangerous thing and we have to hold AI accountable, as though AI is somehow itself capable of making its decisions or having its own intentions or its own actions. That's really dangerous. We need to be constantly focusing on the decisions, the choices of organizations, of people, of companies around how they are designing, developing, deploying AI systems, rather than having these kind of sci-fi narratives of it being AI itself that is making those decisions. This is something that really worries me.
Yeah, very distracting narrative, when existential threat is on the paper. So our last guest is Eva Karczmarczuk. I mean, it's cruel to put a Spanish person on this position. So Eva is the Enterprise Sales Director for Conversational AI at EFECTE. EFECTE, a Finnish company specialized in conversational automation tools and artificial intelligence. She works with business process optimizations across multiple industries, including manufacturing, construction, logistics, and consumer goods and services. And my question to you is, in an environment where companies like OpenAI, but also Google, Amazon, Apple, someone proposed the MAGMA acronym as the new... Jan LeCun, true, the MAGMA acronym to substitute the GAFA, the GAFA one. So considering these are companies that, talking about OpenAI, are proposing tools that are already in, infringement of European regulation. What is the position of companies like yours that need to be aligned with the values? And does this make your position easier or harder?
It doesn't change our position.
Okay.
It's an interesting thing to look at what's happening. And the reason it doesn't change our position is very simple. Because AI tools are just part of our portfolio, and the whole goal of having them is to further develop other tools that we have. So the way we use AI in our company is specific for each business case with the client. So we work with SMEs, but also global corporations, right? And we optimize certain processes in their companies. So the AI we use is trained on the internal data of those companies. So if it's a process of troubleshooting for AI problems, there is little really risk of bias or an unethical behavior of an AI or it learning things that it shouldn't have. If we are, on the other hand, working with them on HR processes, this is where it becomes a little bit more tricky. But because the companies you were talking about, the huge monopolies that are going to get stronger and stronger, those are the companies that have tools mostly or above all for the consumers, but they have a bit of a different target market than what we have. And businesses that we talk with are very careful about introducing products like this, mostly because there are possible legal problems that are connected to that, data traveling where they don't want it to travel. So data protection in Europe is taken under consideration very often and as a top priority in many companies. And not only because that's the regulation, but because European companies actually care very often about data of their clients. They don't want to participate in something they're not sure of. And the second of all, possible copyright infringements. Those are the issues that are being discussed right now. But as someone who is making a decision for your company, and this is a risk factor, you're gonna wait. You're gonna wait, or you're gonna try out different approaches, like tools that we have. That right now, the tools we implement are retrieval-based. So the responses of AI are predefined. They are not generative. So it doesn't create a response based on the big database it has. It creates a specific response that we want it to create, that the company wants it to give. and it doesn't have freedom of choosing that response. So the generative models are being tested by us, our internal ones, but trained only on the data from within that specific company.
So it's a much more local, specific,
Yes.
contained
Controlled,
solution. Controlled solution.
Always there is always a human oversight from our side on the process.
Okay, starting from the possibility of doing it like that. So let's think about this moment. Like, I have the feeling, I don't know if you agree with me, that we are in this very moment where administrations all over Europe are deciding how to encompass this AI revolution in their own way. And there is the tensions between like fast, rapid, cheaper development, which is of course the platform capitalism model, no? Where they come with a solution that is cheap enough, that it's going to happen right now, that you don't have to take care of anything, and it's going to happen for you. Or the slow, contained, controlled, expensive, responsible solution. How, I don't know, how do you see the tension between that and that? Like, let's start at 50-50. Would you say we are at a 50-50 moment where we have learned the lessons of the past, or that we are at a different proportion because we haven't learned anything?
I can start, I guess. So I think what is a very interesting and important lesson is what has happened with the social media. We were not able, for many reasons, multiple reasons, to regulate that space in a way that they would serve us, you know, without addiction, without distraction, without manipulation, without algorithmic bubbles, fact-checking problems and whatnot. That did not quite happen, right? So we've seen a problem with a very important technology that was out there, where on one hand we were reading how leaders of these organizations, these companies, like, you know, social media main players, were calling for regulation, but then ultimately during the process, somehow this regulation turned out to be very soft, right? And the outcome, I think, wasn't very pleasing, right, for all of us. So I do have to say, I've been watching this space of, you know, regulating AI for the past 2 years, because as I said, we've seen this process happening. The unfortunate, or maybe fortunate, interesting part here is that ChatGPT jumped, you know, right in the middle of that process, and I think distorted everything. So maybe there were some ideas around how to regulate AI, and I believe there was a component addressing chatbots, conversational AI specifically, that said, well, we would require transparency. But now if you have such a powerful tool like a large language model, you know it's not only about transparency, it's probably about many other things. So you just have to reconsider, you know, the direction of how you wanted to regulate it. And maybe it's good that ChatGPT happened before that regulation, so at least we have some room to accommodate it. I have to say I am a strong believer in setting up a framework, right, early on, because I think that did not happen with social media. And now ChatGPT and other similar technologies, I'm not sure if you would agree, this is a disruption also for the social media, right? Your news feed is no longer so necessary. You still need to, I guess, show yourself for some appreciation of other people, followers on social media. But in order to get information, you can just jump directly to any large language model and just talk to it, prompt it, and get information the way you want it and where you want it from, using plugins, for instance. So that is really a different paradigm of information retrieval that we are entering, that is disrupting the oligopoly, technological oligopoly that we've had before. So, you know, I would really like to see this regulation being successful. I have heard, you know, many, well, doubts or maybe concerns expressed, where some stakeholders were saying, if we do it, if we regulate, then we always over-regulate, and we will be known as Europe just for regulating technology and stifling its speed and whatnot. But I find it very interesting that in a country like the United States, I spend a lot of time there, and I know that there is definitely the eagerness towards regulations is not there, you know, probably in comparison with Europe, that this discussion about regulating AI, even referencing the AI Act, is happening there too right now. So I just feel that even transatlantically, we could say that we are there where we feel that we need this regulation, and perhaps there are, maybe that's a utopian view, some stakeholders who would like to see it being done better than the previous attempts that were failing regarding technologies that were so important for the consumers and you know, such landscape shifters. So I don't know about the percentage, you know, said 50-50, what should it be? I just feel like it is not necessarily true that if we regulate this technology, that means that we're stifling innovation. If we resolve any issues regarding explainability, transparency on the way, then perhaps we are building better products ultimately. So that's not necessarily something that excludes, you know, one another. And so that's one thing. And I just think that taking into account, somebody mentioned here in one of the panels, the demonstrations, that deterministic, you were there too, I think, Marta. So this deterministic approach. Now, so we are in McLuhan's world, right? Technology does something, it does what it wants, right? And we just follow. We can try to somehow abstain or run away from it, but technology wants something, and it's going to get there. So taking into account that this discourse is really resonating very strongly with many people, and I see it too. I'm on the same page with you, Mhairi, and really I think this is a problem, but if that's the case, if that's the public sentiment, even if it's wrong, perhaps showing some frameworks is the best solution towards a more productive and reasonable discussion.
Yeah. Just one remark. I agree with you that, for instance, for the social media, we haven't regulated it in advance, but it's partly, and the same will apply to these large language models or other technologies in the future, that we didn't foresee all the consequences of its use. And the problem with most regulations and norms we set up is that they are too specific in a way, not necessarily over-regulated. And I think the new attempt of the European Union of the European Commission is an improvement over past exercises. But it should be more value-based and therefore more general and more abstract, so that we can judge new technologies, and there will be new ones coming up, whether or not they support or go against these values we have specified. And then we have a kind of framework of norms that is relatively stable, and that we don't necessarily ever have to adapt every time there is a new technology coming up. And I hope, and maybe, for instance, the risk orientation is a nice one. You mentioned it earlier, but then again, it's used too general. So, for instance, ChatGPT in a medical context would be very different from ChatGPT in whatever, just a chatbot for buying something on Amazon or whatever. So it should be more. So it should be more specific and more, I think, more value, autonomy, etc. based.
This is going to be a string of consciousness, because you've sparked lots of ideas and I haven't put them together into sentences yet, so apologies. But yeah, there's lots of things there. And I think that so one of the big challenges that comes with these large language models, generative AI, but particularly large language models, is that these are designed as general purpose AI systems, and that presents real challenges for regulation, because they're designed to be general purpose so that they can be deployed and used in lots of different contexts for lots of different purposes. They don't have a particular purpose or function in mind when they're being designed and developed. They're massive, like that to have that general purpose function that goes with them being these huge large language models. That scale is enormous, but it's also that there's not a particular function in mind. So that is it's a real contrast to what you were describing, but brings with it particular risks of transparency and accountability. And also in that these are models that are the life cycle is not as straightforward. You know, when we think about the life cycle of AI, we design, develop, deploy AI models, but now we have foundation models, general purpose models, which are designed and developed. Then other people are designing and developing models and systems on top of these models. And then those systems are being integrated and deployed. And so when we think about regulation, there is the life cycle is much more complex, and the number of different actors and players involved in those processes are much more complex. And that's bringing with it real challenges. But the point on like the relationship between regulation and business or impacts on business is a really interesting one, because on the one hand, there's concerns of what regulation does in terms of its impact on innovation or investment, but also we need regulatory certainty to give investors, to give innovators confidence to innovate, to know what they're doing, to know what it means to comply, to know what are the acceptable risks, how to manage those risks. And so regulation has a role to play also in giving that certainty and giving that clarity and enabling safe, responsible innovation. And so I think that's kind of the other side of that. And I did have another point, but it's completely gone, so.
That was a good point, by the way. Well, what I can say, I completely agree, and it's hard to regulate something if you don't know what the final goal, the context is. So how do you regulate or how do you find bias if you don't know what the goal of the tool is? Bias in what? Bias in where? So it's a broad tool, and it's much harder to do than in instances like I described, where it's very, very clear what the purpose of the tool is. So it's a tough. Well, if it would be easy, it would be done already, right? But it's a tough thing to do. And what was said before, I agree. If there is an overall framework of regulations that we can build on, not only for this specific technology, but most of it right now, then we should start with the framework and build onto it, and that is the solution. And from perspective of my company, but many others in the field that I know, we do not see much threat from regulation like that. It's something that's needed because we are part of this society, like everybody else. You know, we are not companies; we're people. So obviously, it's needed.
I like what you just said, that you don't have a problem with that. It reminds me of, there was a moment where there was a debate in Europe about how to resolve the data extraction problem, no? And there was talking about how to socialize the databases of companies like Amazon, like Google, and Benjamin Bratton, the professor from California, he was saying, we could get that data, it's just not going to be useful for us. It's not going to be of any use unless you want to be Google or you want to be Apple or you want to be Amazon, because it is that data is not like strawberries that you pick up from the field one day and you come back with your little basket of strawberries, no, and you see what to do with them. It's just something that you actually make up. You decide what data is, and you normally have a purpose when you're deciding what data is. And I guess in this case, like we're talking about the same problem, you were mentioning before that one of the keys of this narrative is that it is deterministic. Like we are all acting as if AI was a thing that companies like OpenAI or Google have already worked out. And all we need to do is to either, jump on their boat and, get some crumbs out of that, or follow that path, but with a lot of delay because we're starting later, no? And I think this is part of their success, really, because I don't see it like that at all. Like we were talking before about 5G and how 5G was like, the thing that was going to allow for us to, I don't know, have an orchestra playing with a musician in every city, international orchestra, or doing remote surgery in the battlefield and things like that, no? And and the countries that didn't want to have 5G because it had some national security issues with the companies that were developing it, were developing the infrastructure, were going to be left out. Estonia was one of them, and how this debate has been left behind. Now, not having 5G, which is something that pretty much no one has, is not a big deal. Like we're still surviving as humans, and in this case, like I wonder if we are not jumping into the debate of how to monitor and surveil this technology, because it's the one that we have, and we're not considering that there is another path. And I was thinking before, this is like developing the internet or developing the digital platforms, no? Like the internet is something that took a while to develop, particularly in Europe. It took a lot of time to not develop a European internet, which is something that we tried and we failed to do. But the thing is that the internet is a collection of infrastructures that are run by, a collection of protocols that were agreed upon a number of public institutions, and that, develop quickly through scientific and education and research organizations and institutions, and then it became a different thing. But it's still standing, it's like 53 years old, and it's doing quite well. And we do have a say about how the internet works in our countries, no? There is a level of transparency, there is a level of negotiation in between operators and between companies that make the infrastructure. And so I wonder if we couldn't just think about developing AI in that way, and why, what would be the standards or the premises put in place to do this.
We have to practice our coordination here. So.
Okay,
well,
let's establish that not all of you have to answer.
Yeah,
not all of you have to answer in line.
So I think it's quite interesting how we have the innovation and the discourse around innovation and politics of innovation, I would say. So you mentioned 5G. Let's add a few other examples here. Blockchain, I think, is a great example of a technology super promising, now suffering in terms of reputation because of the speculation of cryptocurrency. So it didn't go into the direction of becoming like an enabler for smart contracts, civic services. I mean, Estonia might be one prominent example where that did happen, but in many other places in the world, and it did not. And I think, discursively, blockchain is sort of abandoned, at
because
least for
Estonia
now.
developed its own.
Yes. Well, applauding it, obviously, but what I wanted to mention is that it's quite interesting how this is moving, right? Our I would say imagination around what's going to happen with a given technology and what's relevant. In COVID, we had the metaverse, right, which was supposed to be our gateway to the world that was close to us. There is a company that changed its name to Meta because it was so dedicated to building that technology. And now this technology is somewhat, I would say, suspended, right? And they have to rush to build an LLM, a large language model, because that's what everybody else is doing. And if you're not doing it, then that means you are not a top technological player. So that, I think, is interesting, but maybe that in a way is also reassuring, because that means that we are always in some sort of hype cycle. And now the hype cycle is targeting generative AI. So I guess that part is okay. But then on the other hand, we could certainly claim that this is a very important technology, right? That generative AI is a shift. It's not just like, it's not just the hype, it's many other things at the same time. Indeed, many people have started using artificial intelligence. As many of you, I am a representative of a higher education institution, a university. My students definitely know ChatGPT, and so do I, and we talk about it. We talk about it like openly. We're trying to have a conversation. I'm telling them, listen, I know that you know that I know, and let's just now talk about how you're using it and what's the constructive sort of way of using it, and where I would feel not okay if you did, right? And just don't make me use the detector, which, by the way, is not there or has an accuracy of 30%, so I cannot rely on it. Which brings me to another point. If you can build ChatGPT, why can't you build a good detector? That is a good question. I just, and that maybe somehow tackles the issue that you mentioned, right? How about we have a realistic approach or a step-by-step, and we say, okay, we have to develop a protocol. Here, perhaps in this particular use case, we would wish to have a detector for I don't know, researchers, for teachers in primary schools. Maybe that would be useful, right? Not as something that is supposed to scare you off to never use that technology ever again, but rather as some sort of, I don't know, form of controlling, maybe temporary, whatever, but like just to have a discussion about, okay, this is a technology that is surrounded by other technologies, and here we have means to address it, and here we don't. I remember we've had that discussion around explainability, and at the beginning, the idea was, well, with artificial intelligence, with black box systems, no level of explainability can be reached. Then, after a while, some research, proved that, for instance, for networks that generate images or make decisions or recognize images about, what is on the image, that explainability can be quite good, right? So you can increase its level and see a bit more. For numerical data, for textual data, not so, it wasn't so good, but it was still, I think, a promising research. So I think if we just change the scope of the debate, and maybe get out of the hype for a second, we might see, okay, here is maybe an incremental and small, but solution, right? And here is yet another solution. And if we plot it all together, we might achieve a level where we say, okay, we feel that like with the internet, we somehow roughly understand what it is, where it serves us, and where we would not wish to use it, for instance.
Okay, can I just?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, I thought I agree. We shouldn't necessarily do it this way, but you triggered a few. Things. First of all, the use of these generative AI in education. I think, probably you're right, but I also think we should really rethink our educational and our educational goals. And these kind of tools they will be around in whatever form. Like in the past, we all of a sudden had calculators and whatever. So probably we should teach our kids and students other stuff and accept that that they will use these tools like they did with other tools. That was at least one of the points. So let me give it.
So I will add an anecdote here, because something happened interesting to me, very, very close to what you were saying. I was at a dentist who is my friend, and she was telling me how her 13-year-old son goes to school, and she was talking to her husband about ChatGPT and whether to talk to him about it, and so he will know whether to use it or not use it, and all that, with the full conviction that the kid doesn't know it exists. So obviously the truth was quite opposite. So the kid knew it exists. They had extensive conversations about it with the kids around, but not with the parents telling him how he can use it to actually make it easier and try to use different approaches to studying a certain thing to understand it, right? So this aspect of education, I think, is huge, and the whole discussion around AI that happens because of ChatGPT is so needed, and the hype, it's great that it's here, that we have an opportunity to talk about it, and that people are interested in those talks, because there are so many important issues out there that people are just not interested in talking about. And this is one of those. We should take that momentum and really take advantage of that.
can add to that. I think that is something I think is a real opportunity to have that public discussion and capitalise on the interest and address the sensationalism, like combat the sensationalism around it. But I think it's interesting the comparison to the development of the internet, and if we want to have a conversation about the future development of AI, where that goes, and relating it to the theme of empowerment or disempowerment, is a really important one. Because if we think about how the internet developed, that's a technology that has been hugely empowering for many people, but not for everybody. There are significant digital divides around the world, as well as within particular countries. It has not been the benefits of the internet are not equally distributed. And we also know from plenty of examples that with AI systems, past and present, that they tend to have disproportionate benefits and impacts on different groups within society. When we think about the future of AI, when we think about generative AI, at the moment, the conversations, the high-profile conversations anyway, are being led by big tech. They're being led by a particular set of voices, dominated by a particular set of experiences, which tend to be largely fairly affluent, fairly privileged. We're not hearing enough of the voices and experiences of communities that are impacted by AI systems, communities who have experienced the negative impacts of AI technologies or algorithmic decision-making already. And these are the voices, the communities that need to be at the heart of shaping the future direction of AI. If we want AI to have a positive impact in society, and we want to mitigate or minimize the risk, the negative impacts of the technologies, it has to that's not something that's going to happen by chance. That's something that we need to be consciously thinking about, how we design and develop AI systems to be a positive impact in society and to have those benefits equitably distributed across society. And I think that's a conversation that we need to be having. And that's another thing which is really troubling, but with the amount of airtime, the amount of attention that is going to the voices of big tech players. I've seen Sam Altman in Congress, but we're not hearing from the voices from the people who are impacted by these technologies, who are experiencing the negative impacts, the real consequences of AI systems in their daily lives. And so if we want to realize the benefits of AI, we need to make sure we're having a conversation that brings in these voices and experiences.
Can I add one more anecdote to your anecdote about children? So my friend has an 11-year-old, and that 11-year-old has a cousin who is 3 years old. And he recently said, oh my gosh, she will not remember the world before ChatGPT, but I will. Which is like, I think it's quite strong. It's quite a strong statement,
Who did he think was going to get worse?
Oh, he thought he had it better because he could compare.
Because at least
yes. Between the synthetic reality and something that resembled the real one.
I see. Well, considering this panel has a topic of empowerment and that this is a room full of researchers, I wanted to open the floor to your comments. Asking you to consider the fact that the European AI regulation that has been voted by the Parliament, I think 2 weeks ago, which is possibly the best regulation that there is, as in comparison to all the other regulations that don't exist mostly. So it has a lot of great things, and it seems to regulate to the dangers that are actually in place, happening right now, no? To the infringements that are already happening. But one of the things that I thought was very interesting is that one thing got dropped, and I'm pretty sure there was a lot of lobbying to drop this, which was one of the premises of the law was that the algorithms of companies like OpenAI would have to be subject to researchers, to European researchers, that they would be subject to investigation, and that they would be also used as tools in an open manner for researchers in Europe. And I've been listening to the presentations of some of the super smart people in the room today, and I would say that using privatized American or Chinese privative code under researching circumstances should be illegal in Europe. How do you feel about that?
Should be illegal?
Yes.
Say that again. Sorry,
That's quite radical.
I'm just saying,
Should be
okay,
illegal?
no, I'm just saying that in a room full of researchers, many of you having European funding for your research and working in public institutions, so the rest of us can benefit, enjoy, and even, take your work and somewhere else. I believe that the landing of such a deterministic industry in our researching institutions is extremely dangerous and should be verboten, banned, forbidden. This is my opinion, and I wonder how you feel about that.
I know that for certain purposes at least, for instance my university, but also Dutch government, and for all kinds of usage of software from and data storage from the US, we have all kinds of requirements. For instance, that the data being stored in Europe or in the Netherlands to cater for at least some of the risks you are referring to. I don't immediately see them, as long as we don't have a good alternative European software-wise or open source software-wise, that they will ban the use of these kind of software. So I think then, indeed, we'll run the risk of lagging behind in, and we already are lagging behind in many areas. That's my personal opinion.
Wouldn't that be a great incentive to actually develop our own solutions?
It takes 20 years.
Was there a question about research access to the data, access of their data? And I think in general, like open data for research purposes is, I mean, there's huge benefits, huge advantages of that. When we think about public data sets that are available, like publicly owned public data sets that are available and accessible for research is really important for enabling vital research. I think the problems here is that well, partly when we don't have transparency around what's in these data sets, so nobody quite knows, there's lots of speculation, but we know that there's a whole lot of data with intellectual property implications. There's data that is collected that is unconsented, whether it's not credited or consented. There's data which may be highly problematic, and of course these companies don't want to enable that level of scrutiny to identify these issues and these problems within those data sets. But there would also be issues in terms of then using that for research purposes. We need to have full transparency to know what's in those data sets. We also need to be able to scrutinize them to know what they really tell us, what kind of biases are in that data, what kinds of research purposes, research questions we could answer with them, and what are the ethics of using that data, which where the data collection practices are not necessarily ones that we would agree with. So I think there's a whole lot of issues there. But if we resolve the issues around transparency of the data set, which I think are, I mean, it's a huge problem at the moment, and obviously many reasons for great resistance from the companies for enabling that, as well as practical considerations given the scale of the data. Yeah, that's a ramble rather than an answer, but some thoughts.
So I appreciate the question, I have to say. It's a very intriguing question. Whether we should, it's a geopolitical question too, right? In many ways, that's the way I read it. Like, shouldn't we be building the quantum computer of Europe and the, like generative AI? I know that, for instance, the French government is now trying to create a sort of a space for researchers to build a large language model that ultimately would be French. So I see those attempts happening. I actually welcome them. So I'm not going to answer your question about the ban. Essentially, banning is, I guess, not usually not my choice. However, I do think that pluralism is good, and it's also, I mean, it is true that building a very large and powerful language model is a big endeavor, right? With OpenAI, that started almost 10 years ago, and the training time was 7 years, 8 years, right? So essentially the chat ate up the internet, right? So, and some of that was like a costly endeavor, and some of it was not, and some of it we don't know how they got that data and what kind of data that is, structured, unstructured, curated or not, like that's not clear. But we do know that it has taken a long time, and we do know also that what we are seeing today released as engine number 4 is probably not released 3 weeks after engine number 3 just because it takes so, it is such a short process, but actually it has been incubated for a while before or prior. So I have to say, my students are building a simple GRU, which is kind of an early simple version of a transformer during their second year of studies, which means they can build a very simple LLM or sentence completion system, with their skills, with their knowledge of algorithmics, quite easily, right? And I do think that local versions of LLMs will and can be built, right? That we will see a lot of that, right? We will probably see companies rushing to tell us, hey, we guarantee safety, no leaks, and we are here to tell you that our cloud solutions that include that generative layer, that this is fine, that will happen. But we will also see things like Alpaca, the model from Stanford, which is fully open source. We will see GPT-J, which is an open source version of GPT 4, right, or 3, actually, probably 3. Yeah, 4 is not there. But essentially what I'm trying to say is that I can also imagine a near future, where building a language model from maybe some different segments, open data sets, and on top of that, just some algorithms that are libraries that are available is going to be a feasible thing to do. And I am now a part of a project where that is actually happening, where it's on purpose and in a way it's normative to use an open source LLM as opposed to a commercial one, right? Just to try out whether that's a thing that we can do sort of effectively. So I would welcome that just as much as I would welcome new prompting styles, new prompting languages. I find this space to be extremely interesting now, how we are reinventing coding and formal languages using prompts, how we are creating lists, books of prompts, how people are sharing that, how you have probably now just a couple of different styles. Some of them are good for Midjourney or Stable Diffusion, right, where you are prompting the model to give you an image, and it's much more formal than just talking to ChatGPT. And then you have ChatGPT where you just essentially use natural language that tolerates noise fully, right? So here we will have a lot of pluralism too. I believe that it's not just that we will arrive at a level where we just use the plain natural language, but in fact, for many different tools, there will be many different idioms and discourses, and then kind of prompting styles, and maybe semi-formal, semi-prompting languages.
For education, I can see it, and for some kinds of research, but for other types of research, you will want to use the best available. I mean, it's like open office versus office. Everybody uses Office, and there's a small community, and for certain purposes, and then you will use open office.
Well, I think this is an interesting question, right? So, is pluralism a possibility here, right? We haven't seen much of that in the social media landscape. We've seen an oligopoly, but now this oligopoly is, somehow, as I said, disrupted, right? So, for me, it's quite interesting that a company whose large language model got leaked, and I mean Meta, is now saying, okay, we should open source it all, right? So, finally, they're looking at things from an interesting perspective, taking into account some societal challenges. But
also
I would certainly welcome that.
Regulatory perspective, no?
Yeah.
As it open source should be under, or is probably going to be under a different jurisdiction.
That is one thing, right? That is certainly true. But then again, I do have to say the open source movement has never been strong when it comes to UX. That is a problem. But it's been out there for quite a while and building things, right? And also, final thing I would say here, it's thanks to the open source that we know so much about models like autoencoders, like GPT. because otherwise we wouldn't have known much, right? I mean, how they're built, you know, how the algorithms sort of organized, how many parameters. We have a lot of speculation here because the company is sharing less and less. That's what you said at the beginning, Marta. So sort of the open source movement is sort of a movement that is reverse engineering it all, right? So therefore we have the knowledge how to build similar models, maybe not to that scale, but in the future.
What about Lion? I mean, it's happening in some institutions in Europe. It's just funny that when it happens in Europe, it has to be happening under the regulation of the European Union, and therefore gets into other obstacles. Let's say, I mean, a stable diffusion uses a model that is called Lion that has been trained in Germany, and therefore it's been trained in a much more transparent way, and therefore it's liable to a lot of lawsuits because it's been using material that has been appropriated without consent, permission, or compensation, for instance. The only reason why they are getting sued and OpenAI isn't is because they did it transparently.
Yeah, but I would like to refer to your the word that we were surprised by, the ban. I don't think it's ever a motivating factor in developing anything. So. You know, my company has it's a company motto, a European alternative. And the reason why it's exactly what you said is that because so little technology is actually coming from Europe, looking at how much we use it and what population we have, it's baffling. And we feel uncomfortable with it. You know, as a tech company, we don't like it. We would like it to be a much bigger percent, but it's not. And, you know, on the other hand, tools like this that come as an open source tools give us an advantage to catch up. You know, maybe step in at this point, but then work on further. And I don't think ban is motivating here. I think that the reality around what's going on is motivating. And a good example, I talked to you before about the difference with OpenAI DALL-E and Midjourney that made a product that worked better. And it's 10, 11 people in the company. I just read a newsletter from a company about that today. I was thinking about it. So 10 people took an open source, created something that works better than a company that has, you know, Microsoft's support behind it and money. And so it's possible. And once the technology is there to backtrack, then we can use it. If we start banning things, we limit ourselves. So I would, regulation, yes, banning, not necessary.
All right, on that note, is there any questions from the audience? I was actually wondering, how many of you use AI models for research work? One hand? One hand?
That's not a lot.
Oh, 3
1.5
hands. In the whole room? Oh, I see. I was blinded. Come on. I mean, for the research, not for researching only specifically, as you would be using Google, but I mean as a tool for your research work. Still? Okay, more hands. So when I was talking about banning, I was strictly talking about the research field in public institutions, because I believe that the process and the tools should be as transparent as the results. Otherwise,
no, but the
it is not
data
useful.
travels all over, right? And not are all public. I don't know. I'm not from academia, so that's just a question. Is the data that's used for research stored in local cloud environments on university servers? Is it Google Cloud? It's different for each of the universities, so that's flying all over the place anyway, right?
Yeah.
There is, at least in my university, there is the policy to store it in, like I said, in European or preferably Dutch-based cloud systems. But it can be wouldn't guarantee it for individual researchers in projects. They might use Dropbox or whatever, and so it will be in the US somewhere. But it's against the policy.
Yeah, I keep thinking about the history of the internet, which is a long history. It took a long time to develop, and we know things we didn't know then. We have networks we didn't have then. No, we have superpowers we didn't even know existed then.
But you would ask, maybe these people are all doing projects now in combining humanities and social sciences, using AI or looking at AI technologies. You would ask them, or your proposal would mean that they could not use OpenAI or other software, and they could not use Microsoft tools or Google tools or whatever. They would have to look for or build the systems themselves. I mean, how do you feel about that?
I've been unveiled, I think. I'm a total free software freak, but yeah, I think this particular tool seems particularly problematic in terms of it absorbs, like it's a data extraction machine, no? And so I do believe that public institutions and public researchers should have should be concerned about the privatization of their processes and their investigations, and therefore I would definitely ban it for all of you.
So maybe from a political point of view, I agree that maybe could be a choice, but from a research perspective, I mean, depending on the goal of your research, of course, you might very well, you might even, the goal of your research might even be to come to this ban in the end, but while using the very tools you may end up banning, because you need more data and more evidence for your claim. So it would be counterproductive.
Well,
we'll see in 10 years, all of us.
Yeah, I see that you're heading there in that direction. Well, what I would say is that, for instance, a conference like this one, for me with a background in humanities, but currently working mostly really in the machine learning space, I find that to be very important, that everybody in this room has access to such tools, because I understand that part of your work is a critical assessment of this technology, right? And this is something that is absolutely relevant, and suggesting different paradigms how to sort of research this technology, but also how to change it, I think is very, very important. I can tell you that for instance, we are working with a paradigm where we are querying a large language model, like not a big one, a large one, GPT. We're querying it, but ultimately we are hard coding the assistants that we are building through. Or in mind, we have the paradigm that our models cannot just give you output, just like that. So you cannot delegate tasks to them. You rather have to step into a dialogue with them. You have to talk to them simply, and then sort of that gives you back certain, I would say, agency, and you are more of a decision maker in that process of creating something together with such a model, right? And I think this is not a paradigm that took off. It's called collaborative AI, and I think it's very important. It stems from research, really. It got very well adopted in factories where you have cobots, physical cobots, collaborative robots working together with humans, and they can adapt to the pace of the human. They can, work together with a human that has certain needs, including physiological needs. The human, obviously, not the robot. It has other needs. But essentially, there are very interesting paradigms around these technologies, and some of them are going to succeed and some will not, but most of them stem from research, right, from the research space. So I think this is very important from that perspective, that we really understand this technology and also its limitations very well, right? If it wasn't for the pressure, I think, regarding the let's say data privacy, right? If it wasn't for Italy, something we discussed today in the morning, right? If it wasn't for the ban, probably OpenAI would not create that possibility to either consent or not for your data to be used for the training purposes in the future. If it wasn't for so many researchers raising the question of hallucination, probably that would not be mitigated so easily with different plugins. It's not just a business-to-business dialogue. I think a lot of a debate is now also, you know, getting rid maybe or somehow overcoming this Terminator narrative. I think, you know, if we have some Altman who actually entertains this idea and gives you a P-doom, which is a P-value for the doomsday, and then says, hey, 17% chance of annihilation within 20 years, brace yourselves, then there has to be an alternative narrative, and I'm not sure if it's going to come out of the Silicon Valley. So for me, kind of being able to access this technology has that purpose too.
I just wanted to add on the like the shifts of narratives around AI, in the Terminator narrative and the impact that that's having on kind of the public image of AI and on emerging kind of regulation and policy. But there's also really big impacts on like the field of AI. That since, well, over the last year, but particularly in the last 6 months, when we're talking about AI, and we're almost exclusively talking about generative AI, large language models, there's been such a reorientation of resources, of interest, of discussions around AI, all turning to focus on particularly large language models and also generative AI. And of course, AI, like the question of do we use AI in our work? Well, I'm sure we all do. If we have a spam filter on our emails, we use voice assistants. We have, like AI is all around us in so many forms, mostly fairly mundane. Mostly it's computer programs that are processing complex information. We all use it to varying extents, and it is troubling that the narrative of AI is becoming so interpreted so much as being around generative AI and large language models. And so when we think about how we use AI, how we engage with AI, like it's so much more than just that. But also that we are, these tools, these systems are being dominated by a small number of large tech companies. And so when we make those choices about what systems we want to use, what AI systems we want to interact with, we have to look at a much wider range of possible models and approaches, and it not just being the dominant ones that are kind of capturing the headlines. So we need to think about AI as a much broader set of technologies and tools, essentially tools that that can complement human capacities, that can inform decision making, that can have benefits. But typically, those benefits are the mundane. Speeding up monotonous tasks, processing information, not making decisions, but informing decisions, that kind of thing. And so when we're thinking about the role AI has and how we engage with AI, it's much more, and in some cases much less exciting or less sensational, than the discourse in the headlines at the moment. And I think that's really important.
Indeed. So now, are there any questions from the audience? Nothing. I'm partly blinded by the slides, so big hands. Nothing? No questions? You're all using, oh, thank you. Question in the back. You're all using AI and you have no questions?
Thank you. My name is Gun Spurova, and I'm from Finland, from University of Helsinki. That question is to you, but also to myself, and a question about narratives. Don't you think that narrative of artificial intelligence, it is very soon to be deconstructed? Because we are talking about it in the meanings that big technology companies will not be able to use it anymore, and that new narrative is open source solutions, and that non-transparency is a significant part of their business, and that there is a need to create new new narrative, which is open source solutions, which is known as an alternative to guide just our minds away from that real problem. And if we have open source solutions as technologically based solutions, but hidden business agendas, then actually we can proceed. And that we need to discuss much more about business agendas, what they have, and to discuss together with experts from the field of business. Now we are here representing social science and humanities, but it would be very important to look for cooperation also with technology science and with economical division of scientists. That was my thoughts about the situation. And one another idea what I usually telling in this kind of audience when we are talking about young people and digital solutions, that maybe next time when we are coming together, we could invite our younger colleagues here and to discuss these so important issues together with youngsters who are 15, 16, 17, 18, and 20 years old, because they understand what is going on there, and that the empowerment can work in the way if we are looking for solutions together with young people. Thank you.
Well, thank you. That was more of a comment than a question, but I think we can all agree.
I agree. Well, I mean, I'm working at the university, and the last couple of years, I'm no longer the researcher, as he told you in the beginning, but I'm the dean of a college, an interdisciplinary college, and that there are those young people from 17 till 20, 22, whatever. And we indeed try to bring all these different disciplines, social sciences, but also from the technical sciences, and so they are in a much better position, or they will be in a much better position to judge all these things in the future. It will take a bit, but some of our graduates are already in positions that they can make a change.
To agree on the importance of engaging young people, and also do a bit of a shameless plug for an ongoing research project of mine, because at the Alan Turing Institute, in collaboration with the Scottish Children's Parliament and Scottish AI Alliance, we have a 2-year project which is engaging primary school children. So these are children between the ages of 8 and 11, and it is the most exciting project. These are children across Scotland who are involved in conversations around the futures of AI, and particularly how AI relates to children's rights. And I think this is such an exciting approach, an exciting project, because we're seeking to engage these children in decision making and informing policy, informing governance. And yeah, it's really important that we engage young people, we engage children, we think about the impacts that these technologies have, but also the benefits that these technologies can have. So yeah, it's a bit of a shameless plug, but if you're interested, look up the project. It's with the Scottish Children's Parliament, Scottish AI Alliance, and we've just released a film which is very nice, so you could find that online.
I just wanted to add that there was this leak of a document from Google, apparently, recently, where one of the Google representatives said that, unfortunately, it's not them, and it's also not Microsoft or OpenAI that will benefit from the development of large language models and generative AI. It's the open source. It's honestly like a very, for me, it was a very interesting piece of information that this is anyhow analyzed, because it would feel like this is more of a utopian, for many of us, I guess, a utopian version of reality that will never ever happen, that we would welcome and perhaps want to happen, but it's indeed considered a scenario, which I find interesting, right? That we are in that moment where big companies, in a, I don't know, controlled way or not, are leaking information about the fact that open source now has a chance, right? Because these tools are really, in many ways, I think, accessible. Also notice onboarding of people, like how people quickly learn because of the fact that some of the barriers, like formal language acquisition, like Python or others, this is lifted, right? So that is a change, right? From the competence side, that is a very interesting change. I think particularly when you refer to the young generation that is, obviously digital natives.
Was that part of the documents that leaked, talking about how much faster the open source?
I think it was part of the discourse about who's competitor and who's ultimately going to win, right? So, and then it turned out that unfortunately nobody. So I find that really compelling, that this option is even like opening up, even if it's like statistically not so possible. But I do want to say that, you know, the narrative building a good positive narrative or alternative but positive narrative around AI is very, very difficult. I think it's a big challenge now. My experience as a person, I've been working in language processing for the past 10 years, has always been, oh, it's interesting and scary too, right? So that's the vibration, I would say. That's the general atmosphere around artificial intelligence. I don't think we have the tools and the ideas ready about how to build it in such a way that it's actually friendly and more of the world of the Jetsons than, you know, the dystopian Terminator. But we certainly do need it, and perhaps open source, transparency, some collaborative models, and actually really talking about it as a tool could be a part of the, you know, of the toolkit to start such a debate.
Well, you know, I talk to business clients every day about that, and even within the companies that have quite substantial IT departments, I see such lack of understanding of that technology. Even, you know, I'm not talking about even the generative model where the transparency is not even possible to 100% because there are some things that the people who build it don't really know exactly what's going on yet. But there is very little understanding of the process of how AI works, what it learns on that. There is like an underlying notion that it's some kind of a magic, you know, and it's just the conversation that simplifies it and gives people very straight rules of how it works, those are the areas where you have to worry, those are the areas where you have to pay attention, this is what's needed for the model to be good for you and for your company. I think it gives them a lot. It gives them a different perspective, but the whole idea that there is still little knowledge about it means obviously we need to talk and educate people a bit more and maybe give examples that people can relate to. This is where you use AI. Maybe you didn't know, but this is when it happens in your everyday life, when you for example, use this app or do that.
Well, for me, this is the natural byproduct of having private, opaque tools in administrations, universities, schools, etc. Like for me, it's always been a mystery why we teach children at school to use, I don't know, Microsoft Windows instead of teaching them to make their own operating system, which they can. And it's happened. Actually, the generation that now runs Silicon Valley is a generation that learned to code because there was free software and there was IRC channels full of people experimenting with free software, and there was the ability to modify games and to rewrite different software products, and they learned to code, and then they changed the world. And I think that our schools and universities should be the place for the new generation to do that, but we need to let them. Pre-made, pre-boxed, opaque solutions, for me, are like a staple of this society that don't know how anything works. Anyways. So I think we have 36 seconds. Do you have a question? Our last 36 seconds. 30 seconds. Well, if there is anything you want to add to this lovely panel, this amazing discussion, I am so happy to have the opportunity to sit with you guys, coming from very different places, very rich environments, and lots of experience to share. So,
well, thank you. It was prime company. I love to be here. So thank you for inviting.
That's
Yeah, that's us. All right, well, thank you for coming.